Welcome to the Low Carb USA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
So Dr. Annette Bosworth is with us today, better known, I think, as Dr. Boz. Very, very prominent in this keto, low carb community. Hails originally from South Dakota, little place in South Dakota, right near Mitchell, South Dakota, which is where I've actually had the chance to do some work with. It's an awesome place. But welcome, Dr. Boz. And like I do with most of our guests, is maybe to start out by hearing your story, how you found out about keto, and especially as a doctor, because that's not what you learn in your training, but how you found out about it, how you became involved with it, and how that's led to what you do today.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me on your show. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of your very esteemed conference. I'm excited, and it's been on my radar to say, I would love to be a part of that. So life has seasons, and I am entering a season that is, again, in a different part of the world. I have recently transplanted across the country. And I said to my husband a couple of months ago when we passed our year anniversary of moving, that in all the balls that we dropped at the age of 50, moving across the country with 3 sons, businesses, life, after 50 years in South Dakota, that glad we didn't drop the balls of our children and marriage. But I'm happy to be in your state too, so of where your conference is happening in a few months.
Right, yeah, it could be close.
Yeah. When I look at the origin story of how did keto land in my list, I think there's a few key history points. That I have been that little town in South Dakota had 800 people, and on our wedding day, my mother, I got married between medical school and residency. There was a 3-day break. And on Saturday, I got married, and I drove to Utah, where I trained. And on the wedding day, my husband stood up and said, for those of you people that think you know my cute little wife, she was your hometown cheerleader and your homecoming queen. And this, we are on our family farm for this toast that he's giving about his cute little wife. And the spotlight in the barn that we had the reception in, focuses on this cake where he took care of several of the details of this wedding because I was a little busy. And on the wedding cake stood a man, a groom, and a little bulldozer. And he said, if you're not careful, she'll bulldoze right over you. And I tell that part of my personality because my mother stood up. Everybody else thought he was insulting me. And my mother stood up and said, oh God, he knows who he's marrying.
That's so cute.
And it is true that I'm a little bit competitive. I like to, but I think it's part of how do you get out of a small town where I was a girl in a family, in a farming family, and I'm the first one to ever go to college in my family, let alone medical school. And I remember thinking when I got accepted to medical school that I aspired to it because of a almost tragic story in the 7th grade where I went to something called an assembly. And when you have K through 12 in one building, the assembly was all of the students and this I think was 6th grade and up, that listened to these 2 kids who went to college. And they're answering all these questions. I'm a 7th grader about to be an 8th grader. So they're asking things I don't know about. And like they're talking about going to college, how do you pick a college, and is it sororities and fraternities and clubs and all these questions. And I wasn't hearing anything about a job. And I was just sure that when you went to college, you had a job. And so I raised my hand in the 7th grade. I can remember exactly where I was sitting in the bleachers because it was this most awful answer when I said, well, what's your job? And they're like, well, I majored in the trombone, or I mean, they were art majors and they had no job. And I was like, oh my God, my formula for getting off of this farm just got blown out of the water. And I had ridden my bike to school. So I was riding back home on this dirt road. I pick up the mail. The mailbox is about a half a mile from the farmhouse. And so I'm reading the magazine on the way up the driveway, because that's what you did. And on Time magazine that day, it said job placement with education. And I went to the page, and at the top of the chart, if you went to medical school, you had a 98% chance of getting a job in that department, in that field. And I said, came home that day and I told my dad, I'm going to medical school. And he's like, you don't even know what that means. And I'm like, he was probably right. I said, I don't care. It says that I get a job if I learn this. And so I get into medical school, and I am, beating the odds of all the things to get off that damn farm. And I then do very intense life of being a medical student. And they asked me to make this other decision about what kind of doctor do you want to be? And I'm like, I have another major decision that I don't really know anything about. I've been exposed to a few doctors. And so I'm really anxious over, how do you make this choice? It seems to lead to different pathways in medicine. And so I really was, mindful about, how do I choose what kind of physician I want to be? And when I got down to the heart of what I wanted to be able to do, I loved when I could answer the questions my parents would ask me. And I couldn't just do it in a little way. I could actually explain the mechanism, what's going on behind it, and why certain medications would help, wouldn't help, what you needed to further do to either reverse this problem. I wanted the deepest understanding. I loved that part of it. And that's how I became an internal medicine physician. And when I look at all the energy that I spent getting away from that farm, I mean, in medical school, one of the questions, why do you want to be a doctor? And I was very honest. I said, well, I hate hog chores that much. It's not a lie. That as I get to a choice point in my career where my husband's firstborn, I'm a firstborn, and his mother gets breast cancer, his dad has a heart attack, and my mother gets diagnosed with cancer, all within about a 2-week period. Wow. And I said, I don't think we can get any more signals that we're supposed to move home. And he was devastated. He did not want to move back to South Dakota. And I said, don't worry, honey. The life expectancy of all 3 of them is under 2 years. Once they pass away, we can move. 12 years later, they're now getting to the point where they have serious health problems. And my mom had been on chemotherapy for over 10 years. And I gave her the best care. I moved back to South Dakota to steward this path of giving the best health care to the person I cared about the most, which was my mom. And there's very few times in my career where I would, in a busy day, if a patient asked me the most intimate question in a choice point of their care, I'd like to say that I always paused enough to give them an honest answer, but you're human. It doesn't always happen. But my mom asked me this question where the 3rd time comes around, she walks into the clinic and I can see the lymph nodes. She's got cancer of the white blood cells. The lymph nodes are bulging out her neck. She looks gray. She lives 100 miles away from my clinic, so I would talk to her, but I hadn't seen her in probably 4 months. And I mean, I knew what the numbers were going to say. She's going to need chemo again. And I show her the numbers and she's like, I refuse. I'm not doing this again. The last 2 times you took me through this, I couldn't remember how to use a sewing machine. And I didn't have a bought-in pair of clothes until the 6th grade. She made all of them. So to not have that skill, that's an old memory. That's terrible to lose. And now I'm about to tell her what medicine's going to do again is going to be just as bad. It's the same thing. It's over again. And she asks me, if it was you, what would you do? And it's the most intimate question that most doctors will brush by and not really give it that deep of a thought, because it costs emotionally to really to be in those places again and again. And I had been listening to a podcast about 6 months ago from this moment, between Tim Ferriss and Dr. Dom D'Agostino. And that competitiveness of being a bulldozer was rearing its head, because they were talking about brain injuries, and Dr. D'Agostino was talking about the Navy SEALs and how much a brain injury, especially a seizure underwater, or even a traumatic brain injury, was this process of how do you heal it, and how important it is that you have to do these steps and you can't do these things and you have to do this right. And all of the stuff he was saying is everything that I do in my protocol. That was the underlying thread in my practice was, yes, I'm an internal medicine physician, but peak brain performance is what I really work toward. That was where my superpower shows up, right? That's what I love. And they were describing everything I was talking about, but they were getting the same results that were taking me almost 18 months to get. They were getting them in under 6 months. And I'm like, how? And then they were talking about, doing that protocol essentially on a bed of ketones, on a body that was in a state of nutritional ketosis. And everything from TMS to the way you reprogram a brain to sleep deeply, those repair processes, well, they're hard when people have long-term brain injuries, or when they have habits that you can't seem to rewire very quickly. And I just thought that this can't be this, this has to be fake news. This is like, I would know about this, I said arrogantly. And then I started reading and thought, I can remember the day where I just said, it is malpractice for me to see one more patient without stopping everything. And I run a private clinic, so you don't stop anything or you can't make payroll. I mean, it's a business on top of being a service. I canceled the clinic and said, no one, I'm spending the next 3 days at the library, and either this is true and I need to fix the problem that I've ignored, which is, how do I get people into a state of ketosis? And why would I do that? And I had just done all this and said, okay, before I tell anybody what I'm thinking, because it sounds a little nuts to do this, I'm going to get myself in ketosis. And I couldn't be a stinking ketone to save my life. It was like, well, why is this so hard? And every year on Memorial Day, my kids and I would do a ruck hike in the name of mental health for our soldiers. And so there's a 21-mile hike. And I thought, well, by golly, if I can't be ketones after 21 miles of hiking, then this is a scam. And so I can remember the day that I entered into ketosis was Memorial Day after that hike. And it was 1 week later, I was still peeing ketones. I'd figured out that, dang, you really got to lower those carbs a lot lower than everybody's saying if you're going to measure this and really expect a treatment protocol with outcomes. They're talking out of their mouth a little bit. They're not following the numbers. And it was a week later where I had, kind of gotten through this stack of things I printed out from the library, and the section on what it did for cancer and what's the potential it could do for cancer. As my mom and I are standing there with a pink slip, which should lead us down a hallway to schedule her chemotherapy. She's, already told me she refuses to do this chemotherapy and she's not going to do this. And we're standing there in the hallway of the hospital, and she asks me, what will you do? What would you do if it was you? And it brings emotion just to think of this moment, because it changed her whole life. I said, Mom, without treatment, your life expectancy is 6 months. But what I would do is I'd get in that car right now and drive back to that farm, throw out every carbohydrate on that farm, and start a ketogenic diet. And I get goosebumps because it's such a risk to put her life on the line for something that I barely understood enough about. And we started a ketogenic diet, and it was the most sloppy version of a ketogenic diet I've probably ever led somebody through. But I said, don't worry, Mama, I'll do it with you. And we left my car there in the hospital parking lot, drove 100 miles to the farm, threw out a whole bunch of sweets that had whole food, natural canning, all the stuff she loved to do. And we started a ketogenic diet. And we peed ketones for 6 weeks. And again, I don't get to see her every day. She lives far enough away. But I knew something was better because, well, her voice was alive again. It was like not this zombie of a version that she'd become. And when your white blood cells don't work and your daughter's an internist, every time you get an infection, we say, okay, let's see what antibiotics we can use this time. And she'd been on antibiotics for 50 out of the 52 weeks prior. And she hadn't called for any refills. And so I knew something was better. So we meet at the oncologist, and he's a friend of mine. I'm still not sure how. I'm like, we go in, we get her blood taken, we go sit in the room. And I said, okay, Mom, if he asks what's going on, just don't speak. Shut up. Just don't say anything. I don't quite know how to explain all this yet. And I could tell by looking at her, she looks, I mean, maybe it's placebo, but gosh, she looks so much better. And then I knew something was either terribly good or bad because they came and redrew her blood. Like, oh. So let me sit there and wait. So it's probably an hour and a half we're sitting in this room. And he walks in and says, and he thinks she's gone to chemo. He's like, I can't find the records where you went to chemotherapy. And she goes, I didn't go. And he goes, well, I don't know how you got your reversal of the cancer down so much in 6 weeks without chemotherapy. And in my best prayers, we were hoping for 50% reduction of her cancer. And it shot down 70% more than I could have, my wildest dreams could have expected. And it was only with the sloppiest version of a ketogenic diet that we could do. And that's the first 2 chapters of that book that talk to you about what it is that I did next, because it's not over. And if you look at the picture on the front, that's her before chemo. And then 18 months later is what she is like on the back. So the picture from the front to the back is that journey of 18 months of keto. And I just think that when I lost a bet with my husband to write that book, because I wasn't a writer, I wasn't going to be a writer. I had the other things I wanted to do. And he kept saying, I kept writing down these little sticky notes about how to teach her just enough to the next step, try not to overwhelm her. And I kept all these little sticky notes, and I was like, you should turn that into a book. You should turn that into a book. If you've been married long enough, when they tell you to do something, you want to do the opposite, especially if you have a bulldozer on your wedding cake. And I lost, and the book has sold over 100,000 copies of a story. It's a love story of how much I loved my mom, and how much, because I thought I was giving her the best care possible. And what I was missing is something that was so cheap, easy, safe, and effective that the gift should be to everybody. Yeah. I think the audiobook turned out the best. I lost that bet too, and ended up being the reader for it. And I just think it matches really well with telling a story that really changed my career, changed my mother's life. And yeah, it's worth reading.
That is so awesome. So then, now that that happened, I mean, had you started working with other patients with this diet yet, or did you only do that once you'd had this experience with your mom's response?
Yeah, so the interesting part about all this, especially in light of your conference that's coming up, that I selected my topic before I knew the conference title. So is that if you're working with peak brain performance, as much as people think, well, that's athletes and that's, super geniuses or something. No, it's people who've had injuries. And if you want to look at the biggest collection of people who've had injuries, addiction falls into that. And so as much as an internal medicine doctor wasn't planning on addiction, if I want to get outcomes, if they have addiction in their history and I don't address it, that they fail, they relapse. And by relapse, I mean brain injury wise. Sure, their addiction probably didn't get addressed either, but addictions are messy. They're very, they don't fit into a protocol. There's no prescription for this. But I really think, it's one of those places where God puts you in a spot and says, I've given you some skills and you make the choice of what happens next. And I believe in medicine, there's only a few places left where you can take somebody who really is committed to the science. And if that's all I ever did, it would be a disservice of, well, what is it to improve someone's life? What is it to help them out of a ditch in life and aspects of their health, especially if it has to do with their brain performance? That there's psychology involved, right? You got some, there's some ways to hack it. There's also some pretty great behavioral things that you can practice to improve psychology. But there's also another arm of that, and that is your spiritual health that becomes taboo in the world of medicine. That how can you be a woman of science and a woman of faith? But I contend there's very few places where you can absolutely stand as and bear witness to what it looks like when I do my best part, but this is what happens when you really pour into improving the science of things, the spirit of things, and the psychology of it, mind, body, and spirit. And I really believe that I couldn't say that at the beginning of my career. I think it's I was going to be an ICU doctor where they were all intubated. And it was very analytical, and you can mathematically formulate exactly how the outcomes were going to happen. And I remember signing up for extra rounds of a part of residency called shock trauma. And this was before they had hours of restrictions. So you would start shock trauma on Monday, and you would be there for all day, all night, 36 hours. And you'd sleep for 12 hours, be on for 12 hours, sleep for 12 hours, and be on for 36 hours. You got one day off in the whole month. And I signed up for extra months of that. I really liked the team of people that were around this very sick patient, and how much the ventilation team mattered, and the respiratory team mattered, and the physical therapy team mattered, and the nursing. That collaboration of thinking was, I think it was that small community that I grew up in. I was hungry. How do I connect with people in a way that's not so darn busy? And as much as you think the opposite would be happening in an ICU, I found a community of people that were very committed to what they did, and I loved it. And I thought for sure I was going to head there, but I'm perfectly fertile. And when I decided I wanted to try and have a baby, I was pregnant within weeks, and so I'm holding this baby in my arms when they're selecting who the fellows would be in medicine to go on to the next level for this residency, and I withdrew my name, saying, who's going to raise this boy? So I exit this world. My husband goes, do you realize that you're sacrificing one of the most lucrative parts of medicine to pay off these bills for the least lucrative, which is an internal medicine outpatient only physician? They do not make very much money. I'm like, I'm sorry, honey, I don't know how to do it any other way. Who's going to raise this child? And I entered this outpatient world where the one thing I had to pencil into my contract was I won't see the first patient unless you put a computer in my room. I am not going to handwrite the notes. Who does that? And by golly, I moved in on a Friday night to this office, and there was no computers in the room, and I sent an email to the administrator. You have 48 hours left, or I am not showing up to that job. It's in the contract. I need a computer in the room. And so what I'm pointing out is I'm very analytical. Documenting the process of how do you track your progress is very built into an ICU. It was not built into an outpatient medicine. And in my first job, I got rewarded for being most improved in 3 months, best numbers in 3 months. Physician performance was tracked. And I led that. I loved that. It was just right up my alley, that you should pay me if I do better. And it's a few pennies, but it was competitive. Like I wanted to be the doctor who had the best blood pressure improvements, the best A1Cs, the lowest LDL, whatever you're tracking, I wanted to be good at. And except when you're the newbie on the block, you get the hardest cases. You get the ones where they're underfunded, they've got the most problems, they've got they've got personality issues because they've been sick for a long, there's lots of reasons why they're not doing well. And I quickly learned that if you did not take care of their mental health, you were not going to get good outcomes. You first had to show them how much you cared about them before they were ever going to do any stinking thing I was going to ask them to do. And it did take me about 8 quarters before I won to get the best outcomes. Like, outcomes matter. And so this tracking my performance is from day one throughout my career. And when I look back, especially in the time where I had the addiction care, at the one metric that, I'll tell you one other story just to say how disruptive it can be to study yourself. I'm in this ICU, and while I'm in my training in shock trauma, they do this study that says, what's the biggest predictor of death in this shock trauma? And I was so sure it was the protocol on how we were weaning them off the ventilator. And if we did it this way, it was better. They lived longer than if they did it that way. And this is the new way, and that's the old way. And I'm sure that my generation has it right. And we're going to, and the study goes on while I'm there, but it comes out after I had surrendered to being an ICU doctor. I'm going to now be an outpatient physician. And I'm reading this study, and I can just remember how betrayed I felt. Take a guess, what's the #1 predictor of whether or not you die inside an ICU like a shock trauma?
I have no idea.
One guess. Take a guess. What would kill somebody in ICU every time? What would be the biggest predictor?
My first things would be a mistake, but
Right. Yeah. So how do you predict the mistakes? It was based on, did anybody on the team go through a life event while you were being cared for? And those life events included your kid started drug rehab, your wife slept with a neighbor, your
parent got sick.
This is life.
Yeah.
So when the team dealt with life, I'm like, no, you cannot calculate that. That's not fair. I can't fix that. And so when I study so I go back and I look at, well, what was the biggest impact I had? Because I think, I'm really good at this. I've read the stuff. I know how to do this. I love this. I'm very committed. And I'm bulldozing my way on the best outcomes, right? And if you go back and look at what is the biggest predictor of somebody 5 years out for sobriety, it wasn't which drug I picked. Could I use Vivitrol, an injectable thing that reduces their cravings and rewires their brain? Was it the sleep protocol? Biggest predictor for whether or not they stayed sober was, did they attend group routinely? And the more they missed the group, which was, this fluffy part of the protocol, like this was like, oh, you got to go to group. And I would have to lead group once every 4th time because that's what small clinics do. And I really liked it. I liked how it was very community. It was very much relational and understanding them and having a moment where I would show my vulnerability and my transparency. And if I was able to do that, how much it connected to these people who are, not inherently wired wrong, but really got in a rut in life. And then some addictive behavior swept them into a ditch they can't get out of. And yes, it led to brain injury. And I was really focused on how well their brains would do this and would their EEGs look normal during sleep and all the stuff that would measure, did the brain heal? And the answer was, if they went to group and they participated in what I call the collection of awakening mirror neurons, where primates and humans can use a mirror neuron, which watches somebody do a behavior, and then you copy it. And as a child, you do a ton of this. The reason the 2nd grader, whose parents are, advanced dancers, gets to PE class and has never danced in her life, but she can somehow do it better than all the other 2nd graders, is because she's been watching her parents do this for her whole life. There's something in her brain that's been watching this. Why do football players have football players? There's something they're watching from a very young age. But if you're an unlucky little turkey who never saw life go wrong, forgiveness, grace, how to get through conflict, if you never saw that, and now you're an adult And the only answer you have is, I don't know, my parents disappeared and then they showed back up later. And during that time, you've learned to put a chemical in, or sex, drugs, rock and roll, find some way to be addicted to something. And they begin to say, well, this makes me feel better. Well, it's a coping skill. And now they've practiced this during the most important developmental season of their life, which is from puberty to 25. And now I need to try and rewire it. And it is that mimicking of behavior that happens in a support group. And when I look at the transition of what happened after Any Way You Can, I pushed publish on that book. I self-published and just said, there, husband, I did it. And I had patients asking me about it. I wasn't really advertising that I talked about keto because I didn't need any help with advertising. I had plenty of patients that wanted to see me. And it's hard to explain a ketone 5,000 times. Like, I'm tired of talking about a ketone. So I started putting these chapters from the book on YouTube, saying, all right, I am not going to answer any of these questions until you go watch those 6 videos that I did, because I'm tired of explaining it. And one day I was walking around and my phone is blowing up, where I went from something like, I don't know, 10,000 subscribers on the channel to over 100,000 subscribers. And they all want that. And it was just the keto videos. And so now there's this movement. I mean, South Dakota only has 800,000 people. There's only 100,000 in my town. And I am in February, so it's the following February, and I'm in line to pick up my son from middle school. And it's February, South Dakota, so it's like 30 below. So you're sitting in line, and this woman pushes the book Any Way You Can up to the window. And she goes, and she looks around the windshield and said, "Did you write this book?" Like, and I'm like, well, get in, because it's 30 below out. And so she sits, this giant Brazilian woman, in personality, in size, in everything, sits in the seat next to me, and she is so animated. "Did you write this book?" And I'm like, "Yes, I wrote this book. I just got out of hospital for colon cancer. Do you know what they fed me?" I'm like, "What?" "Pudding! They fed me pudding." And I'm just like, she goes, "I need to be your patient. I've been calling. They won't let me be your patient."
Oh.
And I'm like, my staff will kill me if I take one more patient on. They are boycotting. We are so overbooked. I do not need another patient. And she is trying to do all of her, everything within her to try and get me to see her as a patient. And she says something that really struck me. She goes, "Well, then you need to lead a class on this, and I'll be your first student." And there was something so true about that I couldn't say no. And I said, "All right, Friday morning, 8:00, I'll teach a free class." And I told like 2 people. And that Friday, this was an unrented place, again, 30 below, South Dakota. There's no heat on, and there's cold folding chairs. And it's in the basement of where my clinic was. So I showed up, and by God, 7 people showed up. And the next week it was 15, and there's no heat. Sitting there answering questions about keto. But I know in my mind what's happening is their mirror neurons, they don't know how to deal with life without carbohydrates. And I'm learning as much from them as they're learning from me about how do I teach them how to do this, because medicine isn't going to reimburse me for this. And there's nothing like a free support group that really does attract the right kind of person. I mean, you can think, oh, you should charge them. Well, there's plenty of places to charge people in life, but I needed to see how could I do this on a bigger scale, or at least how could I perfect what I was trying to learn myself when I don't have a big flock of teachers out there. I had some biochemistry and some pretty good examples. And I had the power of being able to test labs all the way along to say, well, what is improving? And in that support group on the second week, David shows up, and David is the second story, which is Keto Continuum. And essentially, it's the handouts that I was using in my clinic about how do I march somebody from the beginning to what I consider an advanced metabolic healthy patient. And many of those steps were the same things I did with my mom. The beginning is very similar, but I learned a few things on how do you get them to a baseline, and then how do you slowly advance the baseline to what I think of as a high performing metabolic state. And if you're in a state of cancer, if you're in a state of brain injury, if you're in a state of inflammatory milieus of autoimmune disorders, then you need a higher performance of your metabolism. And we can measure that, and I can predict that, and I can show you how to do that without becoming my patient. I don't need more patients, because I could spend an hour and a half teaching the next person about a ketone, but it was hell on me, because I was tired of saying the same thing over and over and over again. And when I could do it in a group, it was scalable. I mean, it was like, oh. And so I had a secret rule, like, you cannot invite anyone to this group unless they've read the first 3 chapters of Any Way You Can, because I am not explaining a ketone. If you don't know what a ketone is, you cannot come to group. It was totally self-frustration of, okay, how can I do this better? But I still have that support group here. So if every Friday for 5 years, I had that support group in South Dakota. And it truly helped me script what needs to happen in an internal medicine clinic when you're trying to improve this. But it also, reminded me that I think I believe strongly that if you're suffering from addiction, and if you've been on a keto diet long enough, you know that carbohydrates are very addictive. And when I look back and say, wait a minute, all those addicts that did well, they did well because they attended group. I need a group. I'm no different. I'm human. I'll fall right back into my old behaviors. The ones that make all those lovely things my mother said were important for a prairie woman to know how to do. And group is where the mirror neurons, it's where you get a little better. And just like AA, you don't need to charge for group. You can have your own group, and you might be the smartest one in the room at first, but hopefully what you do is you create other people that are improving themselves, and everybody gets better when you're all committed to consistently checking in and, saying the little things that aren't so revolutionary. It's how well are you doing on your keto diet? We had group this morning in Tampa. I started this January 1st, and rent here in Tampa is much higher than it is in South Dakota. So I have this little postage stamp for an office, but there's a bowling alley next door. And after studying the parking lot, I see that the bowling alley is not open at 8 o'clock on Tuesdays. So I meet the bowling alley guy and say, can I rent your party room at 8 o'clock every Tuesday morning? And by golly, people fly in from all over the country. I do not want them to do that. I want them to have their own support group. But in Tampa, if you want a support group, it's free. It's led by me. It's every week. I don't miss. And it's because I need my mirror neurons to work, and creating a community means that I'll example how I do that. And I just find it an act of service isn't a glib statement. It's something you do. And that's one of my acts of service, is to have that every week.
That's amazing. The fact that you're prepared to do that for free in this day and age is unheard of. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was that group thing. Is it the in-person part of it that's so important, or is this something that would be possible to do online, or do you even do anything similar to that online?
Well, it is interesting in the study of mirror neurons, the technology piece is not known. Now, I have some hints that it works pretty similarly, but the 2D image that your brain sees that I know as a human, can that teach me something that I don't know how to do? So you kind of unpack what is the key moment, like in that addiction brain. I mean, is it that you school them on coping skills? Is it that you, I mean, the truth is, the activation of that mirror neuron is the revelation that they just realized this person who's talking is going through the same thing that I am. It is an unspoken moment. It's oftentimes something patients don't recognize it's happening. And they're able to internalize it. As a facilitator, I try to point out like when it parallels in my life, like, you know, here's how we learn. You're going to watch. And I say that I say it so often that I feel like it's a broken record, that you're going to watch somebody go through a success and you're going to say, oh, I want that. But the biggest place you're going to learn is when they show up and say, I messed it up. And here's how I do the next step. And that moment of being able to say, when you messed it up, don't hide. It's the biggest learning moment you can offer this group. I can't pay for it. I can't buy it. You have to deliver it. And, you know, so I've tried to find the functional MRI that studies the Zoom meeting, awaken your mirror neurons. Well, apparently they must not have very good funding for mirror neurons these days, because I can't find such a study. But I have personal experience that says, you know, the best activities are the ones in person, and the best relationships are the ones in person. So I don't Zoom those meetings. I don't record those meetings. I offer them for free, and I announce the video, you know, every Tuesday night. You need a place to hang Tuesday mornings, 4809 North Armenia, at the Pin Chasers. It's the bowling alley here in Tampa. And you know, and then in the book, I have rules about, well, what is it to lead a group? Because as much as that sounds like this easy thing to do, there are some steps that you can sabotage yourself in a holy heartbeat. We don't serve booze at AA meetings, and we do not serve food at a keto meeting. We also, you don't get to check in if you're new. You watch if you're new. We want to welcome you, but we don't want you to lead the meeting. You'll derail the culture of your meeting. And so there's those rules that it took me years to figure them out. And, you know, a few histrionic patients with borderline personality disorders will nothing but trash your meetings. But they're also very easy to manage if you have the right rules. And you won't know they're there until they ruin your meetings. Or at least you'll be taken off guard, and it's really hard to find momentum again when you get a rhythm. So the part of the, you know, the keto continuum shows, here's the rules, here's what I would recommend. You can do it your way, but this is what I do. And then, you know, finding a, you know, that the ability to pass the baton a little, that not just one person always leads. I don't like to be always the leader. It does happen a lot in mine because I'll get questions, but the best meetings are the ones where you check in and you can feel the leadership isn't a monarchy.
So you say you actually list those rules and stuff in your other book. I think I've got this one here. This one here, Keto Continuum, yeah. Right?
Right. Keto Continuum is David's story. So he shows up, you know, in the first few chapters, you'll hear that he shows up at this basement, and you'll hear about the Brazilian mama who pushed a book at my window there. Mm-hmm. And so it's his story. It's a typical patient story of, you know, all the setbacks that happen when you're trying to lead somebody out. And I just think stories are how people remember. It's on audiobook too. I find most patients with brain injuries don't like to read. And that's, yeah, it's real. And
it's very real.
If you want the best retention, the audiobook with the workbook. And so the workbook makes you write down your stuff, and it says, stop, go to chapter 2 in this book, write it down. Don't listen to the next chapter until you write this down. Even if it takes you 2 weeks, don't go on until you write this down, because what's happening is you're really doing a check-in for yourself. You don't need a doctor to do a ketogenic diet. But it really, if you want outcomes, if you want to have a brain that really does perform well, you know, recently I've had some moving the world across the country and starting in a clinic. It is not a little effort, and I really am trying to where does God want me to use the superpower he's given me, which is the ability to teach and the ability to relate information to people in an understandable way. I do think that's a gift or something I enjoy doing, and I see it do well. And so as I look at the obstacles that I run into, I reflect, is this God's way of saying, I'm trying to get you to do something different? And I love seeing patients. Selfishly, it's the best place to be is behind the exam room door, telling somebody what to do, right? It just fits with that bulldozer. I should have been a boy.
But you can tell you do it because you want to help people and you care about the outcome for them and you want to give them hope. And it's not literally you just saying, I want to tell people what to do.
Right.
You really want to help them.
Yeah. And as you look at that, I've been trying to get a few things done here in Florida that are taking way longer than they should. And if I choose to just push through and do them without some of the sign-offs that come from a federal government that seems to be broken, and I could bulldoze my way through and do it my way, but I'm really trying to wait for this paperwork so that I never have to deal with this question again. But it's taking too long. I was supposed to have the answer in June, and I was planning on all this stuff was supposed to be ready then. And, the lawyers that are helping me with this stuff said, we are at the disposal of this administrative law judge who's going to make a decision somewhere in the next 2 years. And I'm like, what? And so I had gotten everything moved across the country and really set up the other, found my legs a little, and this obstacle has been in my way. I launched an online course when I was writing Keto Continuum. I was also trying to figure out, how do you do an online course? How could I do this for more people? And one of my favorite places, if you look at my resume, one of my favorite things that I got to do was part of the counterterrorism unit in the Midwest, was by the Department of Defense, hired me to teach how do I heal a brain. And it's a 12-hour workshop that is awesome. It's awesome. It's patient stories. There's 12 modules. It's a game. And I've delivered it in person, 30 times, 12 hours. But the last couple of years that I was doing that, I had said yes a few too many times, and it was hard to be away from the family that much. And I've got teenage boys that I don't want to end up in a rehab program, which means their mother needs to be home. And so I had recorded it and said, I'm going to put this as an online course. And then I realized the contract I'd signed, I couldn't release it as an online course until that contract ran out. Well, the contract was due to run out in February of 2020. In the meantime, I said, well, let's practice with a littler course. Let's just do a keto course. And I had written I'd written Keto Continuum, or at least most of it. I wasn't quite done, but I was going to practice the curriculum in this online course. I'm just going to do a little online course, $200, something like that. And I'd had it halfway filmed when I went to visit my son for his freshman year in college in Hawaii. And we landed in Hawaii as a family, never been to Hawaii before, took the other boys, and we had a foreign exchange daughter from Wuhan, China, coming with us, who'd been living with us for 2 years now. And we landed in Hawaii on March 8th, 2020. We got locked in Hawaii for 93 days. And I didn't
remember you telling me this. Wow.
I didn't have a mid-level, and the law is you cannot see a patient if the state you're in, you don't have a medical license. Well, I don't have a medical license in Hawaii, and I'm sure I'm only going to be here 4 days or whatever. And now it's week 2, it's week 3. I don't care how good your stimulus checks are. It's not enough to keep the payroll for my clinic going. I can't see a patient. And I finished filming that online course on my son's iPhones, and I launched an online course, and I sold 1,000 copies in 24 hours. And I'm like, honey, I think we're onto something here. And again, I just think it's one of those places where, I prayed, God, how do I do this? I don't like, payroll is real. and letting your staff go and not knowing what's going to be next. And the launch of an online course really did change things. It really allowed me to say, yes, YouTube is lovely, but if you want an organized process of what is it that I do, what are the handouts that I use at the time that I use it? I mean, how do I step people through this? And yes, a book is good, but an online course is short, organized, and very succinct. So it was easier. And I just couldn't believe the attraction that was there. And as I looked at this last obstacle, when we moved across the country, I'm hungry for patient care. I want to see patients again. But I did something that I'd wanted to do for a while, which is what happens if I lead somebody through a short burst of what I think is the right thing to do for their metabolism. And we called it the 21-day metabolic kick. And we led 200 students through this 21-day kick that we had them all hooked up to a Keto Mojo. They were all checking their numbers. They were in support groups, so their mirror neurons are pinging around. And I'll tell you, it was the most shocking. I mean, I loved it. It was incredible how much I could see a patient's improvement. I mean, it would have taken me a year of seeing those 200 patients one-on-one to lift them all up to the level of metabolism that we got in 21 days as a group. And I just felt that's scalable. That's something, when I see a patient one-on-one, the most disheartening part is, oh my gosh, they have so far to go and I can't lift them there. I can't do I need them in a tribe. I need them with a partner. And just was slicker and snot. Worked out great for that. And so I think, I'd like to think that that all this paperwork's going to work out just fine. But if it doesn't, I'm sure as heck going to keep doing that 21-day course. I mean, at least twice a year, just lift 200 people through this process, because I learned a ton. And I mean, 10 of the each weekday I do a live lecture, if you would. But the first week I've got pretty well programmed what I want done. But then weeks 2 and 3 are the cases. So the job of the coaches is find me a case within your support group here that would teach other people, that their story will teach what the other ones are struggling with. And it was just wildly successful about how much, and I'm sure it's partly mirror neuron, like how much of that problem is the same problem people have over and over again. And next I have I'm excited about where that might lead. That's where the next step is for me.
I feel like Pam is mesmerized here because normally, like I can't keep her quiet in these things. She talks so much, and yet here she's just like sitting there staring at you. Don't you have what? Do you have stuff that you wanted to bring up or talk about or ask?
Yeah, so they'll really enjoy that. There's another lady who's attended our conference who also lives in Tampa who had contacted us last year about our conference and said, I want to do group meetings with people. I really feel like people do so well together and I want to try to do those. So we kind of emailed back and forth. How would she do that? So I'm so glad that you have another resource that I can point her to. She's in your area and she may have contacted you because I think we talked about it. Dawn and Mary had talked with her. But people want to be a part of it and people want to also do it themselves. Right. I heard you say it would be nice if other people could do this in their area. So,
yeah, that was why I was asking about the book. Is that where you lay out the rules and stuff that people might get some help in understanding what they need to do to try and start one of these things? Because I really hope that this leads to a bunch of people in their areas doing something like this.
Right. When I first organized that 21-day metabolic challenge, I imagined it would be for people that wanted, because I find that some of the tragedies for healthcare providers, or at least, I mean, physicians are one thing. I think we have access to resources and the education that will get us, powering through whatever research articles to say, here is what the literature is saying. But when you ask somebody who doesn't have that training to translate what we are learning about the ketogenic diet, it's overwhelming for them to keep up with and to really understand that level of intensity and confidence that they should have with this approach. So I wanted to raise the bar of, where is it that I see people get on a ketogenic diet and fail? And then more importantly, where is it where a ketogenic diet fails and the coach doesn't know what to do next? And I think that is this missing section that, I have learned that on YouTube, I can ramble on for an hour in my lives each week, but if you want a YouTube video to do well, it needs to be short and succinct. And so I wanted to teach what it is I'm seeing in my clinic about how do I advance somebody from this level to this level. And that's really what's in that course, is like, I thought the audience that would want to know that would be coaches, would be people who are advisors. And what I learned was, oh, heck no, just the regular mom and pops want to know what this is. And, I think a tribute to really using good animation, really using, the step, walk people gently into the heavier part of the science has been just something we do really well here at the channel. And I think that those pre-recorded videos, which are like an hour long, but they're the science of how is it that I do what needs to be done for an advanced advisor. So it was my intention, and that the people that I've shared about the 21-day course were all people who had coaches. And I'm like, send one of your coaches, let one of your coaches have the level of training that I would do if I was running coaches. And, it really is a place in this space that I think there's been a ceiling that's placed, that, a glass ceiling, if you would, that says you got to go above that. If you want the outcomes that are clinically relevant, that are really getting into the repair of a brain cycle, or, somebody with cancer, somebody with a seizure disorder, you got to push the numbers and follow the data on the patient. And you don't need me. You can do this without me, but there are some rules. And one of those is the support. I don't think you can get there without a support group. You can get there for a brief period of time. And especially if you have a crisis in your life, like they get the diagnosis of cancer, I think they can hit it for a short period of time. But I want them to do this till the grave. And if you're going to do that, you have to have a system in place that says, here, show up when you can. And it doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to be predictable.
Yeah, and you're there to provide those resources. I think it's one of the things, not only do we want to teach the healthcare professional at this upcoming conference in Boca with this addiction workshop, on this bonus workshop on people for people who can attend on the Thursday, and then the main lectures through Friday. And I'm so incredible that you actually have so much already in-depth knowledge about so much of this. You're going to be a great addition throughout the rest of the weekend as well. But, teach the healthcare professionals how to support, but people need those tools and resources for when they have the difficult times. Because it's one thing, right, to do it, when things are going well and you feel good and you're like, I'm going to do this, and then get the stumbling block or the thing that derails so many people when they feel bad or feel really stressed. Something comes up that they just feel terrible in their life, and it's like, why do I want to keep doing this thing that it seems hard now?
And it is an absolute predictable moment of transformation when you're walking a patient with addiction and they're doing well. We don't care. I mean, great, they're showing up to group, they got perfect little check marks by their life. But where you really get to have a course changing trajectory in their life is when they fail, is when they stumble. And that place where medicine requires grace. There's no other example that I have found in 22 years of seeing patients than when an addiction patient fails. And how do you navigate through that? And I just find if I was supposed to learn something from those years of running a clinic, having it implode because of COVID, and then saying, from the ashes, what do I want to do now? And then saying, I don't think I could be better positioned to walk people through an advanced level of performance in a ketogenic metabolism repair, if you would, than what I've been doing for the last 20 years. And it is that it's the moment of stumble that, yeah, that's where the secret sauce is get them to that and through that.
And that's the place they need it most, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have a better metabolism. You're going to feel your body better. Your inflammation is going to be lowered. You're going to be able to deal with the stress of that stressful life event that's happening, right?
Yeah, I mean, powerful stories of, that slip up that sounds like, the first drink led to the, 500, 4 years later, they come out of a fog saying, I shouldn't have had the first drink. But when you look at a ketogenic journey, it's what is the distance in time that it takes to say, okay, that wasn't the best option, but here's what we do. We all fall. We all have these moments where it's not perfect. And when you have the white knuckle that you are trying for perfection, it's at the avoidance that you're doing that for other purposes. Being perfect isn't what we are asking. It is being better. It is consistency, and is being like, keep it real. Because as soon as you start holier than thouing, the fall is, it hurts. It's a crash. And you're human. There's very predictable things you're going to do. Mm-hmm.
So, speaking of YouTube videos being short, I've found that an hour is about as much as most people can manage. I don't know how anybody listens to Joe Rogan go on for 3 hours. It's just crazy.
What people do.
Yeah, but I think so many more people would actually listen if he had shorter episodes. But anyway, that being said, I feel like this is a really good time to stop. And if people want to hear more from you, meet you, talk to you at dinner, then they need to come to Boca and
Yes.
see you in person. Or if you're in Tampa or you want to fly into Tampa, then you can go to the bowling alley.
All right. Yes. Pin chasers are lovely. I love the family that runs that place.
Sounds fun.
So yeah, thank you so much for being with us and doing what you do. The fact that you're influencing so many people, and I kind of wish that one day we're going to be at that stage where we are reaching as many people as you managed to reach. I mean, we do a lot of good stuff, but we're still scratching and scrimping and trying to build, a following of people that know about us. And having people like you that are able to really get to so many people, it's just awesome. And it makes our lives easier too.
I appreciate what you bring to this, which is the continued medical education that is associated with this. I hope that every health professional who wants to not only learn about the ketogenic diet, but also feel the comfort of being in a space where the science base of this has become even a wider span to try and keep up with. And a conference like this, where it does have an accreditation for that's a gift to me. It's what makes me very attracted to this. My nurse, I'm saying, you should get your CME through this, because there's just not a lot of credible sources that teach about metabolism. And I have found that I love the, kind of over the top mitochondrial reactive oxygen species mess that a lot of the papers get into, but the delivery models that I think I'll finish by saying that I've been teased with an invitation to present a paper or a poster at your event with Keto Mojo. So
cool.
they kind of use their magic wand about 6 weeks before this 21-day conference, or this 21-day challenge happened. and they helped me coordinate how do I get dashboards so all of these students can see other people's metabolism, really improving the transparency, really, the check-in. It doesn't matter if you're the only one that can see it. You really do need the accountability of your tribe. And so they really hit it out of the park. But what they were fascinated by was the outcomes we got. And so they're trying to get me to do a poster with them to present this at your conference. So
fantastic. So put this as one of the posters for a program, and lay it out. Oh, that's super. I'm really
just submit the application sometime so we know to make sure that there's a board for your poster.
She totally did have to twist my arm. I'm like, oh my Lord, that sounds like a lot of work. And I'm not usually one to shy away from work, but the gal who's working for Keto Mojo's name is Jessica. I said, Jessica, if you help me write it, if you help me, I might do it. So I think
you must. That'd be really cool.
So yes, look for that.
Yeah, and so just quickly, people, they've got books. The audio people haven't been able to see me showing up here and stuff. So maybe just quickly tell people how they can find you, how they can get your books and your courses and all of that stuff.
I always think the fastest way to help people is the least amount of money with the highest amount of return. So I think there's nothing better than a good story to really wrap people into what could be, inspire people. And so if you're a beginner, any way you can it hasn't sold 100,000 copies for no reason. I highly recommend the audiobook. It turned out great. And if you've been around the season of keto a little longer, I would look at the audiobook for Keto Continuum and then get the workbook to go with it. And that combination substitutes for a physician pretty darn well. The rest of the things that I do pretty routinely are, I do that free support group here in Tampa. Tuesdays are my long days where I start at 8 o'clock with that support group. And then I do a live every Tuesday in Tampa at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And then I rush to pick up my little wrestler from wrestling practice. Then we go home. But those free lives are a place where you can check out our community. You can see what I like to lead people through. There's always announcements on there about what's going on in the company and what we're doing to try and help people. So bozmd.com is our website. So that's bozmd.com. And there's also announcements and forms of communication that we use through that as well.
All right, that's brilliant. Thanks so much, Annette, and I really am looking forward to having dinner with you in Boca.
We are too. We might be clamoring to sit next to you one night.
Yeah,
so people can't.
maybe we'll have to run a raffle at some stage. People to get to sit with Dr. Boz.
Just so inspiring, and you inspire us, and I can see how you're gonna inspire many other people. And one of the things on our website says building a community of professionals. So even more resources that you provide that are going to help more people themselves and provide hope. So thanks so much for your time. And
well, thanks again for inviting me and letting me be part of it, especially with the rather short notice. So I'm really thankful to be able to join this year. So that's great.
Yeah, cool. Look forward to it. Thank you so much. You've been listening to an episode of the Low Carb USA podcast. You can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/lowcarbusa.